Welcome to Just a Cup on Bleav, an organic conversation with the world's greatest athletes and the individuals that help them along the way on their journey. We're going to have a conversation today, just as if we were in a coffee shop having a cup of coffee. And today I have an incredible pleasure of having with me Dr. Wayne Chappelle. And Dr. Chappelle is a licensed clinical psychologist, board certified by the American Board of Professional Psychology. He has 20 years in special operations in the military and is working with, elite NBA team, colleges, Olympic athletes. And we're going to have a fantastic conversation about a subject that really, hits everything right now. And that is mental health. Dr. Chappelle, welcome.
Oh, thank you, Bryan. I appreciate being on the podcast. Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah. So Dr. Chappelle, your journey of, in the military, but getting into psychology, how did that come about? I'm always fascinated to hear somebody's journey.
Well, it's interesting. When I was thinking about getting into this field, it was really looking back, and I'll never forget. I was in Portland, Oregon. I was watching the Winter Olympics. It was in the 90s, and I am watching Peekaboo Street. If you know anything about Peekaboo Street, she was an Olympic downhill skier. She's a phenomenal skier. And she had to overcome and restore her health from a number of injuries. But she was sitting at the top of a hill, getting ready to go at a phenomenal amount of speed. I'm telling you, she was going to get on skis, go and doing the downhill, where if you make a slight turn that is off, if your ski catches an edge, if you hit some form of ice, you're going down. And by the way, you're probably not going to get up. And if you do go down, especially at 70 miles an hour on skis on a slope that's at 90 degrees, 45 degrees, you're going to be hurt. And I'm looking at her, and she's so composed. She's so relaxed. There are cameras in her face. The wind is blowing at her, and yet she takes a step back. She breathes, and you can tell she is super focused. And I'm going, how does somebody underneath super high demand, extraordinary conditions, operating underneath environmental conditions that would break most of us, look down that hill and perform at an exceptional level, which she did? And so part of me started to think, she's in physically great condition, and she's a remarkable athlete in terms of a skier. But the other part of the equation that I wanted to know more about was, what was her mind all about? What was she thinking? What was she feeling? How did she regulate her thoughts? How did she overcome whatever performance anxiety she might have been experiencing at that moment? How did she excel under pressure? And that led me on this 20-year journey to really figure out, what does it take to succeed underneath the most extraordinary conditions? And to be honest with you, that's what got me into the military. Other than the fact that I had, all of these student loans that I had to be paid back, and I thought, man, I got to come up with something other than eating mac and cheese and tuna fish for dinner at night. So I thought, what? This is a great way for me to explore, what does it take from a mental health or psychological perspective to excel underneath extraordinary conditions. And to be honest with you, some of the most extraordinary conditions that people will be in is the battlefield. How do they prep their mind?
Absolutely.
How do they prep their mind for it? How do they cope with the challenges of that they're going to be faced with, that most people think about and dream about, but never have the capability to do themselves? And then how do they cope afterwards to keep themselves in a position of mental readiness? And so that led me on a 20-year journey with over 90 publications and international research, and really exploring people from across the world to figure out, what does it take mentally.
So you go into the military, and specifically, you had an opportunity to work with special operators, which are the elite of the elite.
Yeah.
As you're working with them, was there anything that you found that kind of set somebody apart as a special operator?
Oh my goodness. Well, so, it's interesting. Everybody has these big ideas about what it takes to be a phenomenal special operations military person. And most people think in their mind, they default to the idea that it's somebody who's big and buff and cut and who looks physically the part. And certainly that's part of the equation. But what I noticed was that's not all of the equation. In fact, people who ended up passing some of the rigorous training programs, which are extraordinary in and of themselves, were not the biggest or the buffest. It was the mental energy, effort, and stamina to endure some of the challenges that most people would give up on. And so that's one of the things that I think that sets them apart is the ability to withstand pressure and pain and to not give up. The idea of being self-disciplined to not give in to what you feel like doing, but doing what you need to do. So self-discipline being a very key aspect to it. And then the drive and the motivation, doing it for a sense of purpose beyond just simply the act of winning or the act of succeeding, but reaching deeply within oneself to say, this is why I'm doing this. I find this, despite the pain and the suffering, inherently meaningful to me.
Just with your description, I can completely see now how the comparison between elite level athletes and elite level military gets such comparisons, and how it kind of they kind of feed off each other in a sense of, hey, they're very similar in a lot of aspects. Is that
absolutely? Like a lot of times when people think about what it takes to be elite, they think about things that come natural to an individual, and certainly there are going to be certain skills that are going to set you apart because you're naturally inclined to do something. You have a natural skill. But in reality, in order for you to be the best of the best, you have to give up many things that other peers are doing on a daily and weekly basis. While other peers are playing and having a good time, you're actually out there working hard and putting energy and effort either on the court or on the field. You're watching your diet. You're watching your water intake, your rest, recovery, the level of things that you have to give up and the discipline that you have to have in order to maintain the mental focus needed is extraordinary. And that's oftentimes what sets those apart from those who are good from those who are great.
Why do you think it's almost like it's all of a sudden in the last couple of years, the term mental health has really come into sports and has really become the buzzword that everybody talks about? You know, why do you think that's kind of happened all of a sudden?
Well, I think because people are starting to realize that without it, if you don't have an intentional plan to address it and to strengthen it, you're not going to achieve your fullest potential. See, think of performance as like a three-legged stool. On one leg is going to represent your technical skill. So all the time and energy and effort that you put into practice and all the time and energy that you put into developing that skill to play the sport well, having a good sport IQ and a good skill set. That's one part of the equation, right? The other part of the equation is how well do you manage your body? How fit are you? How strong are you? How well rested and recovered are you? Can your body endure the challenges that it's going to have to face and cope with, and can it be reliable, especially in those highly competitive, high pressure conditions? So you have those two pieces. It's super important. But regardless of your skill and how well conditioned you are physically, if your mind is not right, you will struggle. You can be technically the best athlete on the court or on the field, but if your mind is not in the right place, if emotionally your emotions are getting the best of you, if your thought processes are going to places that are distracting you, if you're reacting to people around you in a way that creates conflict, you're not going to be the best version of you. So people are starting to realize that mental health is a key aspect to performance. And the more time and energy they invest into strengthening their mental capabilities and their mental health, especially under pressure conditions, the more likely they are to thrive in the very conditions that they're competing.
I've heard you mention before about three terms: struggling, striving, and surviving.
Yes.
between, the struggling, the thriving, and surviving, explain that, what you mean by those three.
So this is great. A lot of times people think, oh, I either have mental health or I don't. Or
Right.
mental health is synonymous with I'm struggling and I'm having problems like depression or anxiety, or perhaps I have an addiction, or I have relationship difficulties. I can communicate very well, so on. So when they think about mental health, it's oftentimes synonymous with problems. And if they think, well, I have good mental health, I don't have any problems, I don't have any depression or anxiety, or I don't have relationship difficulties, so therefore I don't have any problems with my mental health. Okay, well, that's really not sufficient. If you want to operate under extraordinarily high demand conditions, your mental health has to be at a thriving level. So let me break those categories up for you. On one end of the spectrum of mental health, you have somebody who does struggle with their emotions or their relationships, or they have behavioral health habits that are getting in the way of their ability to just simply adapt to some of the challenges that we all have to in life. And so that would be a category of struggling. Then you have what is called surviving. And that is, you don't really have any mental health problems like depression or anxiety or an addiction, and you're able to achieve and fulfill your role as an athlete and do it reasonably well, right? But you're not necessarily thriving. Let's just say that you put yourself underneath what we would consider to be ordinary conditions. Go out, you play, you have to compete, you have to make some good decisions, you have to rapidly think and be ahead and anticipate, and you're doing it reasonably well. Now all of a sudden, let's put you in extraordinary conditions. Let's make the field wet. Let's make your equipment less than desirable. Let's make it where you're operating underneath only 4 hours of sleep and you didn't get the rest and recovery that you needed. You woke up in a hotel room with a lumpy bed and you're thinking, man, this was horrific because the heater was going off and on all night as well, keeping me up. So You're showing up, the conditions are cold, they're freezing, they're wet. You're physically not in your most elite shape, and your equipment is perhaps undesirable. The individuals that have the mental health that is of such capacity that allows them to thrive under adversity and high demand, high pressure conditions, that's what you need to achieve. See, you could be competing, say, at a college level, and I bring this up all the time with athletes. Let's just say you're really good at Division I NCAA college sport, and you're perhaps, say, in the upper 10%, right? Okay,
Yeah.
Fantastic. So all your mental health and all the things that you do to keep yourself in a good mental health shape to survive at that level is going to be considered inadequate and likely insufficient if you want to make it to the pro level or even a higher level. All the things that you did to get yourself to a level of performance here are going to be very different than to get you to a level of a thriving. And I'll give you an example. Let's take college basketball, for instance. The number of games that you play in college basketball is going to be probably between 32 and 40 games a year, right?
Okay. Yep.
So that means you're only going to be traveling to a limited number of times, sleeping in a limited number of hotel rooms, and so on. Now, let's triple that. Let's go from 32 games to 90 plus games if you make the playoffs. Let's just say you don't make the playoffs, and now you're playing 85 games over the course of several months, sleeping in several different hotel rooms and beds underneath much more demanding and difficult conditions. What got you here is not going to get you to the next level. You can go in as a great college athlete and now be less than ordinary and below average at the pro level. So in order to thrive, your mental health has to be in such conditioning that you can withstand the emotional, social, and behavioral pressures and the environmental conditions by which you will be placed underneath. Think of it as like the analogy of the physical body. The more you condition and train the physical body, the more you keep it in shape, the stronger it can withstand the pressures that will be put upon it. Likewise, it's that way with the mind. Now, if you're going to want to become the best version of yourself, mental health cannot just simply be, I don't have problems. Mental health has to be, I can succeed and have the stamina, emotionally, socially, and behaviorally, to perform consistently and reliably underneath the most pressure-orientated conditions where most will fail.
Do you find you know, the stigma when somebody says, oh, there's a mental health, you know, you're working on developing your mental health, or working on developing your mental performance, or whatever it might be, there's that stigma that a lot of people just have. Do you find that athletes kind of take to that stigma and say, hey, you know what, I don't want to talk, I can't talk to a sports psychologist, they're going to think I'm crazy, or I've got issues, or something like that? Do you find that to be, you know, commonplace?
I find it commonplace amongst psychologists who do a very poor job of messaging and explaining what mental health is all about. See, you know, in my position of working with Olympic athletes and professional athletes, military personnel and special operations, to include senior leaders and generals, they all come to the table, they all come to a session with their own ideas about what mental health is. They all have different backgrounds and experiences with mental health providers, some positive, some negative. When you sit somebody down and you talk to them in such a way, and you make the analogies that the strength of your mind is just as important as the strength of your body, and the strength of your mind today determines what you will be able to accomplish tomorrow underneath expected and unexpected conditions, usually the response is, tell me more. I want to know more. What can I do in order to keep myself moving at a strong pace? So part of the reason for why there's mental health stigma is the providers themselves doing a poor job of talking about how mental health is all about thriving and excelling, and not just about overcoming problems. Hopefully that makes sense.
No, I mean, that makes great sense, because I think there's always that stigma. I mean, I know when I was coaching in college, you know, our athletes never wanted to go see a sports psychologist, because there was that stigma that, oh, you're sending me there because I've got problems, as opposed to you're sending me there to help me get better and increase, you know, my overall person, and make me a better person and a better athlete. There's kind of that play on it. How do you go about when somebody comes in? I mean, you've developed some proprietary assessments.
Yes.
So how did that come about for one, and then we can go into each of the different assessments.
Well, I've got some great analogies. I think if you go to anybody that you want to work on, or that you go to rely upon to help you with strengthening your mental health, first of all, you got to know with some level of precision where you're excelling already and what you do that comes natural to you, that you thrive at, and what areas do you need to do better at, and what areas can be potential vulnerabilities. So it's like going into a physician and saying, hey, can you treat me and help me become better physically? And the physician say, oh yeah, I'll just do this, and not give you a blood draw or give you an MRI or an X-ray. You need to have tools and assessments so that you have a level of precision. See, my time with athletes is very limited. So if I have this much time, I need to be this effective. I need to be extraordinarily effective.
Right.
And so I will give assessments that look at aspects of their emotional functioning. I'll look at aspects of their behavioral traits, like how disciplined are they? How driven? What does their work ethic look like? Oh, how open are they to doing things differently and thinking about different things? And doing things differently. And the reason for that is because the drive to excel and achieve at a high level also has to be consistent with your drive to change. Because what works sometimes will not work all the time. And so you got to figure out, as you grow and develop as an athlete, how to change, right? So you use these assessments, and then you compare them to people who are not in the general population, not the average person, but people who excel at extraordinary levels. So if I have an athlete and I sit down with them and they look at me and they say, hey, you don't know a whole lot about me. I've been an athlete for, say, 20 years. What are you going to tell to me that I don't already know about myself?
Right.
I look at them and I'll say, I'm going to put you through an assessment. And this assessment in which you tell me about yourself is the same assessment I've given hundreds of other professional athletes that they responded in the same, and that they've described themselves to. Would you like to know how you compare in terms of drive, effort, energy, stamina, resilience, social IQ, emotional IQ? And the answer to that question is, oh yeah, it gets to
Sure.
And tell me more, Doc. So
as you say, it makes the first thing I start thinking about is comparatively to coaching. It's like you're watching game film or you're watching practice film. That's kind of a similar. You want to find out about an athlete, how they perform on the field or on the court. You watch their game film and you can, develop an understanding of how they are. So this seems very, very similar, but just with the mind.
Yes. And so like we've got a lot of studies out there in physical fitness and physical performance where we can look at the musculoskeletal nature of an athlete and go, wow, here's your body fat composition. Here's the bone density. Here is your ability. Here's your VO2 max. Well, now let's take that and map this person's mind and look at other athletes who've excelled underneath extraordinary conditions and say, okay, this is now a gauge for you to shoot for how you manage. And the reason for why this is important is because I've had really elite athletes look at me and say, hey, guess what? I am totally fine in this area. My ability to think differently and to think outside the box and my comfort with doing things outside the box is consistent with most professional athletes. And I look at them, I go, oh, no, it's not. It's well below average. That's what you think and that's what you've been told. But now I actually have objective behavioral science to show you that's really not the case. So these assessments not only are to help us to be precise and know what we need to work on, but it's also to help increase the insight of the athlete themselves. And sometimes it means changing how they think about themselves. I've had many athletes come in and say, oh yeah, this is a strength. And I look at them and I go, no, it's actually a vulnerability for you. It might have helped you at this level, but it's not going to help you at this higher level.
And have you seen when you're kind of working with the athletes, have you seen them make radical changes or big changes and pivots in how they maybe they prepare for a competition or just getting a better understanding of themselves that they make some pretty substantial changes?
Yeah, so that's really, I think, important. And that is the growth of an athlete and how quickly they change or how much they change is dependent upon a number of factors. But most athletes who are self-motivated, that they desire to become the best athlete and the best person of themselves.
Sure.
When you show them what they need to work on, many of them are very independent and they go, okay, now I know what I need to work on. And they start making self-corrections. In areas where they struggle with making those self-corrections is where now I come along to help them, to support them, and to help them make the changes and the adjustments in their thought processes in their behaviors. So some are able to do it independently on their own now that they've got the roadmap, and others, they need a little bit of hand-holding and support along the way, like a coach.
On average, how much time do you get to spend with an individual?
Well, on average, like with professional athletes that I'm working with now, minimally, I'm meeting with them once a month individually. There's a good percentage I meet with 2 to 3 times a month. And then depending upon a person's circumstances and where they're at and what they're trying to accomplish, I'll meet with them 2 or 3 times a week for a specific period of time.
I ask that because, sometimes we're in our society where, well, let me just do it one time. And that's going to check the box and I'm going to be great. where it's like anything else. You have to put effort and you got to put practice into it.
Yes.
To kind of make true gains as opposed to, again.
So that question about how often do I meet with them is a little bit different than how often are they working on their mental health. So I might meet with them once a month to 3 times a week, but every athlete that I meet with, there's the expectation that they're working on their mental health every day. They are making deliberate, intentional decisions on their daily and choices that lead to strengthening their mental health every single day. And whether that's decisions related to how much rest they get, how much recovery they get, boundaries that they put in relationships, adjustments to how they communicate and speak, to how they regulate their emotions, they're just intentional about it every day.
How are teams, I'm trying to think of how I read this, like buy-in. Buy-in's always a big part of any kind of moving of the needle. Whether it's in the strength training world or it's in the sports medicine world. Do you find the same in sports psychology that, once there's buy-in, it kind of, is a metamorphosis effect and it kind of spreads?
Yeah. So buy-in is absolutely critical from the top down. Once you get buy-in from the top down, whether in a professional sports agency, this could be a general manager, perhaps for a professional baseball team or basketball team, it could be the head coach as well. It also has to be the human performance staff in general. The more somebody buys into something and the more leadership does, the better they are in terms of messaging and supporting and integrating psychology as part of the whole operations. So that is absolutely critical. Now, I do want to share a couple of things about the buy-in process. I mentioned to you earlier about athletes buying in now that they understand that their mental health is a critical component to thriving. And it's not just about the absence of problems, but the presence of specific traits, habits, and patterns of thinking that allow them to excel underneath the most difficult conditions, right? So you're going to get a buy-in from that. But the other piece that's a buy-in is I look at athletes and I say to them, your professional career will end. Whether or not it is today or tomorrow or 10 years from now, you will be retired, either voluntarily or involuntarily as a professional athlete.
Right.
And in my experiences of working with former and veteran professional athletes, they always say, what I know now, I wish I would have known when I was an athlete about my mental health. And the habits and the traits that I developed as an athlete really determine who I am and who I also become after my career. So I look at them and I say, man, you might be this young person in your 20s or your 30s and you're still excelling at an exceptional level. But what we want to do is to help you become the person you're destined to be over time, well beyond who you are as an athlete. And so this is not just a transactional process of helping you so that we can win games as an organization. It's really helping you become a better person, because who you are as a person and how you succeed as a person not only determines your success on the court and on the field, but also your life personally. Keeps the things that when you take a step back and you're most proud of the things that you and the things that bring you the most joy, it isn't always about winning. It's about the relationships and the impact that we've had on others. And so that helps with the buy-in. Now, I'm going to switch gears. I'm going to go to the head coach. Okay, so now I'm going to go to the head coach, and I'm going to go to, say, leadership within the organization.
Right.
Now, in many cases, college coaches, athletic directors, general managers of professional organizations, head coaches of professional teams, they're underneath a tremendous amount of pressure to win. Because if we take a step back, sports is an entertainment industry.
Yes.
Here. We can live without it. If somebody says, I have $300 to either restore my health and treat my cancer or go to a baseball game, people are going to say, I want to restore my health. We can live without it. I will spend the $300 to put food on the table versus, an hour and a half of entertainment. So we have to put it all into perspective. Now they are underneath pressure to win. And
Big money.
if this is something that gives them a competitive edge that allows them to win and to in a professional sports organization, meet the needs and demands of the owners, or in an athletic organization, bring funding into the school, it absolutely becomes critical. So I'll give you an example. Certain college sports like football and basketball, men's football, generate the vast majority of revenue coming in for college. And let's just say basketball is one of them. Let's just say you're from a small Division I college. Making it to March Madness, just the first or second round, could be absolutely critical to how many scholarships you give later on down the road.
It can be a big game changer for sure.
Absolutely. For some schools, it can fund significant proportions of their athletic programs.
Yeah.
So for them, the mental health of their athletes become all the more critical to what they can achieve collectively as a team and as an organization. And there's there's economic incentives behind it, but then there's also another thing now with NIL and how much money that athletes are getting and how much universities are allowed to invest in those athletes. Let's just say that you spend a tremendous amount, well into the six figures to bring an athlete on board, and you made them, you provided them with the resources to get the skill, and you provided them with great resources to get the great body, but you did nothing for the mind. And now they crashed and burned under pressure or relationship issues. And now that money that you invested has gone to nothing. It just burned up in the morning.
Do you find that the most professional teams and major colleges have, specific sports psychologists on staff, or how does that kind of work in that realm?
So let's take a look at
they're not all the same, I'm sure.
They're not all the same. And so what's really interesting, and I think what will surprise people the most, is you can look at very well endowed, very well resourced Division I colleges that crank out lots of professionally elite athletes, and they'll put a tremendous amount of time and energy into having the right physical equipment and technical equipment, and they'll have this whole staff for physical rehabilitation and restoration and strength and conditioning, and they don't have a singular mental health provider assigned to that team. Yeah. Or they might have one mental health provider or two mental health providers for 600 athletes. So most organizations are not very well resourced. And it isn't until a problem or a crisis hits that they go, oh man, what could have we done to have prevented this? Or they look over at another team who's excelling and beating them, and they ask them, what are they doing differently? What kind of things are they investing into that gives them that competitive edge? And they go, oh, they got a sports psychologist. We need to get involved. We got to get one. So, and by the way, not all psychologists are the same. Not all psychologists have the same level of training in athletic sports. You can call yourself a sports psychologist, but most of your time has been spent with elementary school students and high school students.
Right.
So you got to invest in the right people too, because that makes a difference on how well the psychology program.
Yeah, because sometimes they say, well, we have a mental coach. I've heard that a lot in different colleges. We work with a mental coach, and that might not mean they're certified. That might just mean they just got a certification somewhere or something like that.
And they're not necessarily equipped at a very high level to assess with precision of athletes' mental health across the whole spectrum. In other words, they can say, wow, I'm a mental performance coach and I can help this person deal with performance anxiety, but I don't know how to deal with some of these issues and temptations that they're struggling with off the court that are interfering with on the court performance. I'm limited there. So most mental performance coaches, their role is focused exclusively on what that player is doing on the court and the habits that they develop. But when it comes to relationship issues, potential addictions, learning disabilities, ADHD, attention deficit disorder, histories of depression, they're ill-equipped. Hence, most organizations, if they invest themselves relatively well into the people to do this, they'll typically get a licensed clinical psychologist or a licensed counseling psychologist with a PhD that has a lot of experience in the sports arena or a military arena.